7 o'clock. Okay, we're gonna get started. I think most everyone who should be on is on. We might be missing one presenter right now, but we'll just come back to his slides should we need to. So with that, I will get started, and barring any technical difficulties, we'll hope this goes well. Just want to start off by welcoming everyone to tonight's, the first part of the direct-to-consumer beef webinar series. It's a three-part series. Tonight we are going to focus on production, and we've got a great speakers set up for you tonight. Tomorrow night we will focus on processing, planning, and marketing, and on Thursday night we will focus on sales. This webinar series was created in response to several new inquiries that we've had as an organization, seeing farmers who are interested in raising beef and selling direct to consumer. It was a trend definitely before COVID, but it has been accelerated during the COVID-19 months, the past couple months. My name is Olivia Vogel, and I'm the local food project coordinator for the Kentucky Center for Agriculture and Rural Development. I'm going to be one of the hosts tonight, and I'd also like to introduce you to my colleague, Spencer. What's up, Spencer?
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Spencer Gwynn, and I've been a business development specialist with K-Card for a little over 3 years now. So, welcome.
All right. So just a brief intro to who K-Card is. We are a nonprofit organization that was established in 2001 to facilitate agricultural and rural business development in Kentucky. We provide educational opportunities, one-on-one technical assistance, and business support services to farmers and agricultural businesses across the state. I've got a slide right here just kind of outlining how we do that and how we serve. And in addition to this, we've also launched the Kentucky Local Food System Expansion Initiative, which is a project that I'm primarily working on. And we'll talk a little bit more about that on Thursday night. But in the meantime, if you have any questions about K-Card's services, please check out our website. We have a blog that talks, gives more detail about what we do. So next, just a couple housekeeping items so that everyone knows how to participate tonight. At any time in the webinar, you should be able to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I think we have disabled chat. Sorry about that. So if you'll just put all of your questions in the Q&A, there'll be a session at the end of each presentation to take question and answer, and Spencer will be monitoring that. And if there's any questions that we don't answer tonight, please reach out to us, and we'd love to follow up with you on that. We will try to stay on track with time tonight and keep it to 1 hour and 15 minutes. And we will be also recording the webinar, and we'll have that to you by the end of the week. If all goes well, we're gonna shoot for Friday after the end of the series. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce our presenters and show you the agenda. So tonight we have Dr. Jeff Lehmkuhler of the University of Kentucky College of Agriculture, Food and Environment, the Animal and Food Sciences Department, and he is going to be talking about beef production, and he's not on here yet, so we might end up skipping his slides and coming back to that part of the webinar. And then we also have Melissa Ballard of Bluegrass Beef, and we have Nathan Lawson of Big Springs Beef, and we have the Executive Director of the Governor's Office of Ag Policy, Mr. Warren Beeler, and a few other K-Card staff on here. So the last thing before we get started is a brief introduction to the attendees tonight. So you guys were asked a few questions before the webinar, and these are the answers to those. Over 50% of you, or almost 50% of you, have been raising cattle for more than 10 years, and 20% of you have been raising cattle for 5 to 10 years. However, only 39% of you currently raise and process and sell finished beef. So those numbers tell me that there is significant interest in selling finished beef direct to consumer from experienced cattle farmers, which is a great thing, or you wouldn't be tuning in here tonight. So with that, Instead of launching into Dr. Lehmkuhler's slides, we're going to go to the producers first, if that's okay to spring that on you, Melissa and Nathan. And I'm going to go to your slides real quick. Is your slide up? You are muted.
I think I'm unmuted now.
Yes, great.
Good deal. Melissa Ballard, my husband Josh, and I and our kiddos, Eli and Ruby, live in Shelby County, Kentucky. And we do 100% grass-fed, grass-finished beef. We started selling beef direct to consumer in 2011. We'd had some cattle for a few years before that. And I could tell you the whole story about how we started selling beef, but that's for another night. My husband is also a veterinarian. He's a mixed animal veterinarian here in Shelby County. And I am mostly a farmer, and I'm also a part-time radio DJ. So that's a little bit about us. We can go to the next slide. I don't know if I can do that or if Olivia, perfect. We have slowly grown our herd up to, we have about 100 head of mama cows in our herd. We're a mostly commercial operation, but we have been using Red Angus bulls for the past several years. I'd say probably 7 to 8 years, maybe a little less than that, but we just really like the Red Angus influence. And we have liked the Red Angus so much that we've actually started a small but growing herd of registered Red Angus cattle. And since we are 100% grass finished, we find that they finish well. The specific type of Red Angus genetics that we are using finish well on grass. And that is super important for what we're doing. We can go to the next slide. So we sell our beef. We sell our beef by the cut and also by the share. And when I say share, I mean we don't do a true quarter. We do a true half, and I'll sell a true whole steer. But we have made bundles. We do a 40-pound bundle and a 75-pound bundle. And a 150-pound bundle, and I call those steer shares. And so in addition to selling by the cut, we do sell by the share. We use a USDA inspected processing facility. We use Trackside Butcher Shop up in Henry County. I believe our processor will be talking tomorrow night on this. And that allows, the USDA inspection allows me to be able to sell at farmers markets. We sell at 3 farmers markets currently. We sell at the Simpsonville Farmers Market here in Shelby County. We sell at the Eastwood Village Farmers Market, which is in Jefferson County. And then this year I've started selling at the Franklin County Farmers Market in Frankfort. We also do on-farm sales. We have an online ordering e-commerce website through Local Line is the company, and people can get on, choose their cuts of beef. They can either pre-order for pickup at the farmer's market, or they can choose to pick up right on our farm, on our porch. I put meat out for people in coolers, and they can pay online or leave me money in the cooler and pick up that way. We also have a strong social media presence. That is a very important way that I market our beef. On Facebook and Instagram, I'll use them a little bit differently, but we work really hard to share our story and generate interest for our products on Facebook and Instagram. And I could talk all night about social media marketing, but that's for another night. So that's us.
Great, thanks, Melissa. And I just wanted to mention too that participants, a big part of the producer panel is Q&A. So if you have questions about production or about sales, feel free to shoot those into the Q&A section. But with that, we will go next to Nathan.
Can you hear me okay, Olivia?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. First, I'd just like to say thank you to you and to Spencer and to K-Card for the opportunity to participate. My family and I live and farm in Spencer County. We're actually near the town of Bloomfield, which is just over into Nelson. So we're right on the Spencer-Nelson County line. We farm a little over 800 acres currently in Spencer and northern Nelson counties. And we began farming and selling beef directly in 2005, primarily through friends and family that we were raising beef for and finishing for, and started selling directly and opened that up to be available to other consumers at that time in 2005. Next slide, please. So we market our beef under the name Big Springs Beef. A little bit about our operation and our cow herd. We've grown from about 30 cows in 2005 to 145 cows today. That growth has been internal. We've retained heifers and grown by retaining our own genetics and trying to build our herd internally. And so we're mostly a closed herd of cattle, but we've grown from about 30 cows in 2005 that we purchased to start out with to about 145 cows today. We have a split calving herd. We calve spring and fall. The majority of our cattle calve in the fall. And I think the split calving system works really well with the direct marketing because it gives you better options in terms of timing for finishing cattle. You tend to always be able to have something online in a sense to be able to provide to your customers if you have more than one calving group. It's just a personal opinion. I know there are ways to manage that, but a little bit of background for us in the decision to direct market is, farming in Spencer County. Spencer was once one of the fastest growing counties in the state, and there in Louisville Shadow. Having grown up in Spencer County myself, I never really thought that farming would be a reasonable expectation for me given the cost of land there in Spencer County. And so the decision for us to enter into the direct-to-consumer market was really one based out of necessity to try to be as profitable as possible on a smaller scale acreage-wise, and to try to grow our business and retain more dollars from that calf into our own family's business. And so that decision was really born out of that need. To be very honest with you, the first farm that we bought, Wanda and I bought in partnership with my parents, and we were fairly naive in terms of what we were getting into and what we were stepping into with regard to that financial commitment that was year in and year out. But we've grabbed the bull by the horns, no pun intended, and tried to make the best of that. And the direct-to-consumer space has really been a great place for us to be able to take advantage of capturing more dollars for our cattle in that regard. So we're a Black Angus based herd. We cross with some polled Herefords. I would characterize us as a commercial herd. We do have some registered Black Angus cattle, but to be very honest, we stopped registering animals when cattle got really high in 2014. We were growing a lot of tobacco, and we were really busy during that time. Cattle were worth a lot of money, and we just did not see that the registered business was one area that we wanted to try to grow and build a customer base in. And so we didn't continue to capture that value. Instead, we put more of our energy and our attention into the direct marketing of the beef as the end product to the consumer. Big Springs Beef is a pasture-raised beef. We do offer both grain and grass finished. I would characterize our grain finished beef as grass on or grain on grass. That's a phrase that I've heard recently that some folks have utilized to kind of paint the accurate picture that these cattle are on grass, but they're also on grain as well. We utilize distillers byproducts here in our area. That's a great source for us to be able to add protein to our rations and get a good nutrient source in there, blended with corn that we grow. And then we also take advantage of wet hay or baleage. We utilize a lot of wheat baleage, some corn silage, but not too much recently. We've kind of gotten away from that and gone more toward the wet hay and the baleage. We do market our beef as an antibiotic, steroid-free beef. We know that all meat is antibiotic-free and steroid-free, but we do market it as antibiotic and steroid-free and are USDA inspected. One thing that is a little unique to us is that we don't do a lot of retail sales. We do some retail sales. If you want to move on to the next slide, Olivia. We do sell primarily in shares, so that would be quarters, halves, and wholes. For a number of years, we were selling an eighth or a split share that we kind of called it, and that got a little bit cumbersome and challenging on the cutting side. And so in order to try to simplify life a little bit, we got away from that. But we do sell, a true quarter, half, and whole, and that's the bulk of our business, and that's really where we put our energy in. The retail that we do sell by the cut and by the package is at our local farmers market there in Taylorsville, and we've been at that market for over 10 years now. It's been a good market for us, and it's been one that's been slow growth, but we've got a great customer base there locally in our hometown. We used to sell at a market in Louisville, and Wanda and I were both very busy and took up a lot of time on Saturdays with her working off the farm part-time as well. And so we had to make a change there. But since COVID, we have increased significantly the number of pounds of product that we're moving off the farm directly in terms of those retail cuts and packages. Folks are coming to the farm to pick it up. I think one of our questions later kind of hits on that touch point for me. I love that piece of this business. I love the opportunity to connect with those customers and to have them out and to not, to give them a very accurate picture of what life is like for us and what our operations like, and we don't shy away from those things at all. We do sell directly a little bit of product to our local grocery store there in Taylorsville, and then also market some cattle to local butchers as grass finished product, and then occasionally grain finished calves whenever they have openings and we have cattle available. Currently, we're selling about 24 to 28 cattle a year this way. That's up a little bit for us since COVID has hit, but I feel like that one of the keys for us is that just marketing and time spent marketing. I feel like that the opportunities are out there and fairly, I'd shy away from saying limitless, but as much time and energy as you can spend marketing, I think that the opportunities are great, particularly if you're in an area where you're close to a population center. So very thankful to be in the business and thankful again for the opportunity, Olivia, to join you all today.
Thanks, Nathan. We are going to go next to some Q&A for Melissa and Nathan. I do have a couple preset questions, but then several questions have come in during your presentation, so Spencer will tackle those. So first, if Melissa, maybe if you want to talk about the most challenging aspect of your beef business.
Sure. Well, I would say the challenges of the production side are very different than the challenges of the selling and marketing side. Like there's two sides to that for sure. On the production side, we have, we could finish more beef if we had more land. And so that has been a challenge for us. We own one farm and then we lease some farms, and it'd be great if we had another farm that we could lease to either kind of background some of our finishing animals or our weaned animals on, or a farm where we could finish more animals. So that's kind of been a challenge for us in that respect. And then From the selling perspective, marketing perspective, there's a lot of logistics involved with freezer space and inventory management and getting beef home from the processor frozen and getting it organized and into freezers. And that can definitely be a challenge. I enjoy those challenges, but it can definitely be a challenge. And another one that just came to mind was I'm like Nathan, I really love the customer relationships and customer communication, but it can be overwhelming. When COVID hit, my phone blew up, and it was a constant thing to just keep up with all the inquiries coming in, and it can seem overwhelming at times just handling all that customer communication.
Great, thank you. You're not the only one. We've heard that from a lot of producers, that their email inboxes and phones blew up a few months ago. Nathan, what's your take on the most challenging aspect of production and selling?
Good question. So, in terms of the production side, one of the things that I feel like has helped us is trying to make direct to consumer fit with what we were already doing, and using our structure to grow that business from within in a way that didn't create more jobs. And so I will say that while the grass finish is something that we enjoy doing, and it's something that that we believe there's a premium in terms of capturing a premium for that kind of production system, because of the way that we raise most of our cattle, it doesn't fit us as well. And so it's a little challenging for us, because we will have to manage those calves completely separate from how we manage the bulk of our weaned calves during those two weaning times per year. But I wouldn't say that that's the most challenging, but from a production standpoint, that's one of the things that comes to mind for us, is just trying to manage both groups that we're trying to market. I would say probably the most challenging thing is just quality control on the product is a big deal. And consumers and our customers, they want consistency, and they want something that's going to be presented to them very, very well, very consistently every time. And so I say that because it takes a lot of energy on our part just to make sure that we're keeping everything moving in the right direction there. We work with a great processor, and they do an excellent job, but they do a lot of business, and they have a large employee base as well. And so we have to do our due diligence to make sure that we're keeping that product in as good a quality as we can from the standpoint of its presentation to the consumer. Not that the meat itself is different in quality, just the presentation of the product and the package and that sort of thing. And I think more than anything else, it's just a matter of time. When you decide to market beef directly and you enter that production system, you're basically deciding to retain ownership of that calf until they're nearly 2 years old or a little older. And so I think that having that in mind is important if you're considering this, because you're making a decision to shift from either an existing production system that you already have and you're familiar with and may or may not have worked for you, but you're going to make a transition. And so being able to absorb that extra time that you're going to have that calf and need to maintain that calf on the farm and keep them healthy and growing well, I think is a big commitment and a big decision, one to consider, as you move forward.
Great, thanks. And I think you both might have touched on one of the positive aspects earlier in your presentation, but just if you want to comment on the most positive aspect of your beef business.
I think for me, the customer relationships are huge. And Nathan commented on that as well. But going outside of that, I guess this is a plus and a minus. We spend a lot of time as a family doing beef stuff. And my kids, you know, they get dragged to farmers markets. They have to help me put beef in freezers, and we do a lot of things. But that is a positive as well that I've seen from this. Our kids are learning to work in a business. My 9-year-old makes change for people better than many adults that I've seen at the grocery store or whatever. And so it's been fun to see them learn aspects of a business that they may not have experienced if we weren't doing this. So that's a positive.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I'd agree and echo what Melissa said as well. I mean, we love folks, and it's a great opportunity for our family, and not just for Wanda and I to interact with folks on a regular basis and consumers, but also for our kids to see that, and for them to grow up seeing that, and see see everybody coming to the farm being a friend. That's one of the changes that I think has been most welcome for me out of the craziness of COVID, even with both Wanda and I now working off the farm, is that we can invite people in and have good, candid conversations. That leads into another positive for me, is the education piece. And that's something that I'd just like to comment on briefly, if now's an all right time, Olivia, is that one of the things that I think that we all have to keep in mind in this business. So let's think a little bit about what percent of the population we are. In agriculture, we say that production agriculture people are less than 2%, of the U.S. population. And so in the beef business, we're really more like about 0.8 of 1%. We're well under 1% of the population that is involved in producing beef for protein. And so I say that just to say that in direct marketing, there is a temptation to market on merits that might be almost antagonistic against another production system in the beef industry. And my comment there is to encourage folks to consider that we're all in this together. And so it takes us all. And so this is an opportunity to market to a niche market in a sense, but maybe even something that's becoming more mainstream. But I think in marketing our product, we got to be real careful to not disparage, our neighbor down the street that's not finishing beef and dealing with individual customers. Maybe, on our business, we might work with 6 different families on one steer, by the time it's marketed and sold. And so that opens up a lot of doors to have good, honest conversations about beef production. And, what better time than now, given all of the challenges that we're faced with environmentally and politically and culturally around the impression that most non-agricultural folks have of the beef business and beef cattle and raising beef cattle. And so one of the biggest positives for me, Olivia, is just being able to highlight that with folks. One example is on our farm at any given time, we can take folks to a pasture with cows that have calves at side. We can take them to a pasture that has weaned calves that are on feed, or weaned calves that are on grass. And then we can take them to another paddock that has a group that's in that 15 to 20 month stage or 24 month stage that is finishing on grain and grass. And so they get to see so many aspects of the life cycle through that process. And I really love that opportunity to educate and advocate for our industry, even in a one-to-one situation with each consumer.
Great, thank you. We're going to take our time through some Q&A, so you guys are doing great. The next question is advice for a beginning farmer. Melissa, do you want to start on that one?
So I'm going to overlap. I'm going to touch on a few things that Nathan said, and I feel like learning to tell your story well is really important. and focusing on your operation and what you do well instead of focusing on what other people are doing. You know, our operation looks different than Nathan's, but there's room at the table for everyone. And if a few years ago I started, I found myself feeling competitive with other producers, and I had to take a step back and think, no, we need to operate from an abundance mentality and not a scarcity mentality. If Kentucky beef producers could capture just like a little bit more, there's so much market share out there for everyone selling local beef. And the more of that we can capture, the better. So sharing your story, talking about what you do well, and being willing to work with other people is like a huge win for every cattle producer in Kentucky. And I think that's so important. Also, learn to finish beef well. That is some advice that I want. One of my fears through all of this COVID and everyone wanting to sell beef, I think that's amazing and great, but I always want people's first experience with local food to be a really good one. So we all need to make sure that we're putting forth really great product out there, because we want people that are trying local foods to taste the difference and then want to come back to that. So just make sure that you're finishing beef well and learning to do that really well. And also don't be afraid to price your products for what they are worth. Do the math, run the numbers. We are not Kroger or Walmart, and our beef should not be priced like theirs. Although right now I hear prices are really high in the grocery store, so maybe they should. But don't be afraid to price your products what you feel is high. I struggled with that in the beginning, and then I realized, no, the time and energy and resources that we have in this beef, it demands a higher price point, and I'm confident in my product, and if someone doesn't want to pay my prices, then they're not my customer. So that's my advice.
Great advice. All right, to you, Nathan. You're muted.
So advice to a beginning farmer, is that okay?
Yeah.
Yep. I think that my biggest piece of advice would be to consider the cost. And I say that in a positive tone. It would be to consider the cost. One, know your cost of production. If you're unfamiliar with the cost of production beyond weaning or beyond the yearling stage, try to get an accurate idea as best you can before you start down that road of what it's going to cost you to retain that calf to the 20-month plus stage, or what the target is, and know what that's going to cost, or have as good an idea as you can. The other thing is know your market. I think that there's a lot of room in this to go in so many different specialized directions that we have to be careful that we don't get too spread out. And so I would say that, identify the market that you're gonna enter into, whether it be grass finished, grain finished, or both, or if it's going to be by the cut, if it's going to be freezer beef shares, or if you want to try to provide finished cattle to a butcher shop or another customer in that way, and try to decide on that and head in that direction. But with that, as I mentioned earlier, I really think that focusing on marketing is a big deal, and that's one of the things that we don't do as good a job of, I don't think, in agriculture, that the local food revolution really has helped us learn is that marketing is the place that we have the most potential for growth. And so I would encourage you to try to learn to be a good marketer and take advantage of the opportunities that are out there to tell your story, as Melissa said, and to create, in a sense, your brand of what you're trying to market to your customers.
Thanks, Nathan. I've got a couple questions that I want to pose from some of the things that have been coming in from the audience here for you two, and then we're going to move on. So just if Nathan, I'll ask you one, and then Melissa, one for you, and then I think we'll try and move on here in the interest of time. But one of the questions that has been pretty prominent, and I'll let you all pick who wants to answer which out of these, but how are you addressing some of the challenges with processors being so busy and you're all trying to meet your increased demand?
You can take that one, Nathan, because we've been okay.
Okay. Well, that's a great question. I think that that's a space that we have a good opportunity to try to put some energy into as a state and as an industry to grow. COVID has definitely helped us realize that more regional processing might serve to mitigate some risk in the event of something as challenging as COVID. I think we have to keep in mind that is kind of an outlier. You know, this is a once in a lifetime, I think, we hope experience with a pandemic. But saying all that just to say that, you know, with us, we've had a consistent number of appointments on the USDA processing side for about 2 years now. We haven't really been able to capture any more appointments, but I feel like that we could definitely do that. Fortunately for us, you know, our customers have been willing to wait, and that's kind of where we are. We're at a place now where we're booking next year's appointments, and so I guess to try to answer the question, you know, just trying to be patient is one of the key things, and realizing that everybody's working really hard, especially the processors. You know, much like our grocery store, retail, and food service folks, these local processing businesses have been open through the storm, you know, and so they've been working really hard, just like we do on the farm, to try to help meet people's needs. And so being patient and working with them is a big deal.
Thanks, Nathan. Last question. There's been several that have asked about what your all's pasture-based programs are, specifically what forages you're using to try and finish your cattle out on.
We have great established pasture. We very rarely do any seeding or anything. We have a good mix of clovers, red and white clovers, fescue, of course, orchard grass, bluegrass. We have great pasture, and a lot of that has been just from keeping cattle on it and rotationally grazing it, and just really working on recovery time of our pasture. I mean, I could talk all night about rotational grazing, and we could go into a lot of details, but we try to minimize our inputs as much as possible. Our cattle give us a lot of good fertilizer when they're managed well, and there's a lot of great seed already in the soil that can come up with some encouragement. But most of our grasses are just kind of your standard ones, and some producers I know do a lot of like annual grazing on some different warm season annuals and things like that, like during the hot months, and we really haven't done much of that. I don't know that I'm answering the question perfectly, but we've had a lot of good luck with just finishing cattle on those grasses that I've mentioned before. A lot of variety is important when you're talking about grass finishing too, I think. And our pastures do have a lot of variety.
All right, thanks, Melissa. Olivia, we want to.
Yeah, we'll get started on Dr. Lehmkuhler's slides. I've got them pulled up. So Dr. Lehmkuhler, I will share my screen. Give me just a second.
Sounds good. I apologize. I've been in the realm of us doing our evening programs that have started at 8 o'clock, and I guess, overlooked the time and then put it down for 8. So my apologies for showing up an hour late. But without further ado, because we're running behind, I'll just kind of keep on going through. And what I thought I'd do is go through a little bit of some of the differences when we think about the nutritional programs of feeding and cattle for growing and finishing versus maybe cows. And understand that most of us recognize our cows are going to fluctuate in body condition, that, you know, during the period of time when the calves are not on them, they're weaned, and there's relatively low nutritional needs or demands for those cows. They're going to put condition back on and get ready for the next lactation. And then oftentimes in this area, our forages typically don't supply enough energy intake, and those cows will lose a little bit of weight as they go through lactation. However, when we think about it from the standpoint of a forage-based system, a lot of times our quote-unquote nutritional plane, even for our higher milky PD genetics today in our beef industry, forages aren't going to supply enough, and so we're looking maybe on average between 300 to 500 pounds of grain supplement to keep condition on cows. If we are not careful and we get milk EPDs too high and get too much milk in those cows. If we do a good job on maintaining appropriate stocking densities and improving our pastures, we can avoid the use of supplement and keep cows in good condition, but we also have to watch that milk production level in those cows. And obviously the other trend has been bigger cows, and we've gone from 11 to 1,200 pound cows to 13 to 1,500 pound cows that require more inputs. The contrast on that is with growing and finishing, we want more of a constant increase in body tissue mass and gain. And so we need to supply a higher plane of nutrition year round if we want a steady rate of gain. And that's a little bit of a challenge as well when we move into the times of the year when forages go dormant, or like now when much of the state has seen a bit of hot, dry weather and the pastures just aren't growing like they should. I want to share with you a little bit here. This is just a common typical growth curve. And if we think about age going along the bottom, and we think about size or increasing weight on our y-axis, when we move from conception up through weaning time, these cattle are in a period of time of skeletal development and predominantly lean tissue growth. When we wean those cattle and then we're looking at a growing phase, they are still putting skeletal mass down and framing up, if you will, but they're also still in a relatively high tissue accretion of protein, which means this is a period of time when we often see protein limitations on growth, and that really comes into more feed conversion and feed efficiency. If you look up at the top of that curve where it begins to kind of plateau out, you'll see maturity, and most of the time, really if we're thinking about trying to reach a quality grade of choice, we are just under kind of that maturity size. And at that point, the cattle are beginning to put more fat intramuscularly because they have finished building frame and they've kind of tapered off on their protein accretion. And so more of the calories are going into fat depots. And our plane of nutrition can impact both the time or the age at which we're going to harvest these cattle. If we have restricted growth, these cattle are going to take longer to reach that slaughter endpoint or mature weight. If we increase the plane of nutrition and speed up that growth and get them into fat accretion quicker, then we're going to reduce that time or age. And that's important because age is one of the key elements when we think about tenderness. Now, I hope this will play for you. This is an animal from the Pasture to Plate program from a couple years ago. And when we look at this animal, you can see that this heifer appears a little bit blocky. You can begin to see some fat around the tail head, over the back hip structures. And when she comes forward towards you, you're going to see a little bit of fat being laid down there in the brisket. And so this is one that we would, in today's conventional market, would say that's harvest ready. Now, a lot of times, folks may think about, well, how do I know when an animal is going to get close to that terminal weight or target weight? And if we go back and look at the Beef Improvement Federation handbook, we can go in and look at frame scores, and this will give us a general target weight. However, realize that heavier or lighter muscled animals can make us need to shift what that target weight's going to be. And for example, if we look at a really heavily muscled animal, we may perceive that as condition rather than quote unquote fat, subcutaneous fat underneath the hide. And the other thing is that we have seen our cattle become a little bit more deeper bodied and have a little bit more capacity in them. And so those tables don't necessarily reflect that, because we've got greater visceral mass in those cattle than what would have been used to derive those tables. And so harvest weights may be 50 to 100 pounds heavier than what you'll see in those tables. And we'll take a look at those tables here in a minute. So to get hip height, in that previous picture, we're just measuring from the ground up to the front portion of the hip. And we take that height in inches then, and we'll use a table like this, which is for bulls and steers. And we'll look at the age of the animal. So a lot of times we're doing this at weaning, which is around 6 to 7 months of age. And if we had an animal that we measured around 45 inches from the ground to the front part of that hip, then that would put that animal in at about a frame score 6. Likewise, if we're looking at replacement females that maybe we're going to be thinking about selecting out at 12 months of age, we can also use a heifer chart, and that would allow us to try and make some additional calls if we think our cows are getting a little bit too big, or we need to increase frame score in those cattle as well. And then we can use that frame score and come in here and look at kind of a target estimated mature weight of our cows. And so if you look at the frame score 6 that we just talked about in that animal, it would be classified as a large frame score feeder calf. And then that quote unquote slaughter weight on a steer would be somewhere around 1,250 to say 1,300 pounds. Heifers are going to typically reach maturity a little bit earlier, and they'll have fat depots accumulate faster than steers, and they're going to be about 100 to 150 pounds lighter. And then one thing, I guess it's easy as you begin thinking about it, if you know some estimated weights on mature cows from cull cows, that will give you an opportunity to think about what your slaughter weights might be on some of your steers. They run relatively close. If you look at that frame score 7 cow mature weight of around 1,320 pounds, they're saying that a steer's going to harvest around 1,350. And thinking about today, a lot of our cows are in that 1,300 to 1,400 pound range, and most of our steers are finishing around 1,350 to 1,450. So I put that in there simply because it gives us an opportunity to use these cow weights at a body condition score of 5 to help us project when an animal might be quote unquote finished, and realize that most of this is in relationship to conventional beef. If we're grass finishing beef, typically they're going to come in a little bit leaner. You know, instead of being 6/10 of an inch, it's not uncommon to see them at 3 to 4/10 of an inch. However, because of the slower rate of growth that allows more frame development, the actual slaughter weights are not too far off from what we would see in conventionally fed beef or even the grass-fed guys. So here's an example. We've got a target harvest weight of 1,300 pounds for this steer. If we wean that calf at 550 pounds, that means we've got 750 pounds of gain that we need to put on that calf prior to harvest. If that calf were to gain 3 pounds a day, it's going to require 250 days or almost 8 months of feeding. And I think that's where a lot of folks get caught off guard. It does take some time to finish some of these cattle. It's not going to be 60 to 90 days unless you're in a specialty type market. So let's think back. We've got a yearling calf. Let's say right now we had maybe a fall-born calf that we weaned in March and kicked out on this grass, and it's gotten really dry, and so they're weighing maybe 700 to 800 pounds, and we decided we're going to pull them in and pull the feed to them. And can I get this done in 60 to 90 days? Well, remember where we're at in this kind of growth curve. At a 700 to 800 pound animal, you know, we're slightly over where we would be in breeding weights on our heifers. You know, they're 700 to 800 pounds for a frame score of about a 5 on a heifer. And that's where these yearling type steers or yearling type cattle may be coming in. So 3 pounds a day at 75 days on feed is only going to put us at about 1,000 pounds. So, you know, this might be an example of where we're harvesting maybe a glorified feeder calf and not really a conventionally finished beef calf that's going to have in that high select, the choice marbling and have 4 to 5/10 of an inch of back fat. So how do we achieve these kind of finished cattle? You can do it in a multitude of ways. Grass-fed, grain on grass, more of a conventional grain-based program. There are a lot of different ways we can finish cattle. And from a feeding standpoint, I'm not referring to product label claims. I'm not at all saying that we're looking at grass-fed or you know, Nebraska corn-fed beef programs or anything like that. We're talking simply about production nutrition type of programs. And understand, as the table shows you, that as we want a higher rate of performance, going from say 2 pounds of a day gain to 4 pounds of a day gain, that animal also has greater nutrient needs to develop that tissue. And I use TDN because a lot of cow-calf folks are familiar with TDN. And so we're looking at going from roughly 12 pounds of TDN at 2 pounds a day gain up to almost 15 pounds of TDN available to that animal to achieve that 4 pounds. And we also have to have a greater increase in crude protein to support that protein deposition that's occurring in that animal. So we have to tweak the nutrition program a little bit if we want to push for higher levels of performance. Now, grass-fed and or high forage programs, if we think back to, for example, the Lower's lean programs that utilize the high amount of haylage and roughage, they're typically lower energy dense diets that result in slightly lower daily rates of gain. And then that converts over into slightly poorer feed conversions. However, pasture is relatively inexpensive in this state, and so our forage production under good management can provide us with a very cost-effective system for growing cattle and finishing cattle on grass. However, the slower rate of gain, if we run through some numbers down here at the bottom, you can see that typically 22 to 26 months of age at slaughter is common. And if we kill an animal at about 1,250 pounds and that calf weaned off at 550, if we only achieve the 1.5 pounds a day gain, then we're looking at about 15 months to finish that animal. The other challenge is we've got greater environmental and heat stress that's going to reduce our performance on our fescue-based systems. So if we look at grain on grass, this is kind of a hybrid system, and this can be very easy to implement, and it's kind of allows you to improve your pasture management while you're transitioning into finishing. It allows you to understand or gain some knowledge on how to better manage pastures to get better quality, like the speakers earlier said, to support higher rates of gain in a straight pasture system. It increases our calorie intake and supply by providing that supplement, and it's very easy to get 2 to 3 pound a day gains with some supplementation, and performance is going to be variable on how much grain you offer those cattle. A lot of folks will kind of set out to be around 1% of body weight, which is about 40% of their daily dry matter intake. And so they're still getting about 60% coming in from the forage. So this is one way to kind of transition in between. Other folks will go to the extreme opposite, and they'll put a self-feeder out on a pasture and say that they're pasture finished, when we really know in that situation probably 80% of what they're consuming is grain, and only about 20% is coming from the pasture, unless they're using some type of a limiter to control the grain intake. And then lastly, the other system would be more of the conventional. And in these typical rations, they're 80% plus grain. We're using some type of a protein source, and it could be a co-product like the wet or dry distillers grains or corn gluten feed. We may be using a self-feeder, as I mentioned earlier, or we may be using corn silage and high moisture corn in a TMR along with wet distillers grains. Another really common way, and the way that that my dad always did our freezer beef, was, you know, hand-fed grain and then access to hay in a hay bale. And the only challenge with that is, you know, you have to ensure that you have high quality hay to encourage those cattle to eat enough hay to maintain a good rumen fermentation, that we're not causing any digestive upsets. If you put out a really old rank fescue bale that's been rained on and half moldy, you increase your risk of having some problems because they're not consuming enough forage in that situation. So we need to maintain about 2 to 5 pounds of forage intake or hay a day. And I'll just give you an example with corn silage. That would be about 20% of the diet on a dry matter basis. And we would be looking at somewhere around 15 to 20 pounds of corn silage a day if that animal is weighing about 1,000 pounds. So our target on grain is usually around 2 to 2.25% of body weight. And so as that animal is getting 12, you know, around 1,200 pounds to 1,300 pounds, you know, they could be consuming 25 to 30 pounds of grain, and that would not be uncommon. So in those situations where we're really increasing caloric intake and we're providing a balanced diet to give the protein that those cattle need to meet their genetic potential for gain, 3 to 4 pound a day gains would not be uncommon. And so we're looking at, again, the math of about 8 months to get a calf finished when we're putting that calf straight onto a high grain diet after weaning. So here's some of the results that I just wanted to share with you from our Pasture to Plate program. Again, this was a Kentucky Beef Network project that we did back in 15 and 16 with funds from the Ag Development Board. And we looked at both kind of situations here where we had either a hand-fed grain with a round bale, and that was up at Eden Shell. And you have steers and heifers here. Steers are in blue and the heifers are in orange. And then at Morgan County, we had a self-feeder kind of under the barn, but they had access to pasture. And then at Princeton, they were on a self-feeder and they had no forage, no hay. The forage was cottonseed hulls built into the ration in that self-feeder. And you can see that as cattle had more choice, if you will, to go to either eat more hay or eat more pasture, performance was slightly reduced compared to a more high caloric intake ration like that was at Princeton. But all three systems provided relatively good rates of gain, being over 3 pounds a day. Now, I guess there's been a lot of discussion, and I like the question that came up that Spencer asked the producer panel about harvest dates, and that has been something that I have heard, and even my in-laws over in Indiana have struggled some with that. Spring-born calves, as you look at them, and we talked about, you know, that 8 months on feed, if you were to put them on a high grain type of a finishing program, that harvest window then is going to be in that May to June timeframe. And so be trying to predict what your performance is to schedule some dates if that becomes an issue. The same thing you can see there on the fall-born calves that might be weaned in March. If you were to stick them in a high grain type of a program, then you're looking at an October to November harvest window. The challenge with that window is that typically coincides with deer season, and space limitation can be a challenge if your processor does a lot of deer. Spring-born calves that are going to go straight out on grass that might be weaned in November, they may take, say, 15 months to finish on grass, and you're looking at a January, February harvest window. And I just share these with you to try and get you to be thinking about this, and then to try and convince you to make an investment in spot checking performance and weigh the calves, or at least get a weigh tape. They're not 100% accurate, but it's better than guessing, and get an idea of where these cattle are at, and so that you're going to hit your harvest windows with your processors. Now, it was mentioned earlier, I think Melissa might have said this about budgets, and it's okay to discuss with your clients and your consumers what your costs are. North Carolina has a great program. It's a local program. It's called NC Choices, and they've come up with a really neat kind of breakdown flyer that shows, you know, these are my costs and this is why this beef is going to cost X dollars a pound. But if you go through a budget, something like this as an example, if I had an animal on a conventional grain-fed diet for 200 days, and I looked at what my average intake was going to be in that program, had 20 pounds of grain and 4 pounds of hay. And if I had about 2 tons of grain fed at $225 a ton, that's $550 in the grain mix, roughly another $40 to $50 in the hay. And then I've got to add in what my feeder costs would have been because I kept that feeder calf back rather than selling it. So I had that opportunity cost that I gave up at $850 in kind of today's market. And then I have to add in my processing. That's $1,800. And if I took home 450 pounds of packaged beef, you know, that's a $4 a pound break even. And most of you don't want to work for just break even. You want to work for profit. So you need to do your own budgets and figure these things out, because too many farmers that I've worked with in the past have tried to compete with conventional prices because they felt like they couldn't buy in. But in today's climate, if you explain what your costs are to your consumers, they're more willing to pay that. They want to help you out.
Dr. Lehmkuhler, this is Olivia. I'm going to go to your next slide, but we are getting, if you could, I know you have a lot of pictures left, just speed it up a little bit.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So this you don't have to spend any time on, but all I wanted to show you is that when we move from a grain, quote unquote, program, a conventional grain program, we need to step these cattle up on grain, and it can take some time. And in this situation, you know, we typically take somewhere around 3 weeks to convert them from forage-based to grain-based. And we can skip over that. That's just showing you how we might do that. And this is just some different examples to share with everybody that we can have very complex type of rations to very simple rations. And sometimes we make it too hard. And so we can work with nutritionists, and you have plenty of feed companies that will work with you to come up with a nice finishing program for your calves. And then lastly, the one thing I always say is to try and remember these cattle are in a high lean phase growth. Protein is often overlooked, and our fescue hay is typically only around 8 to 9% protein. And these cattle are going to require a total diet of around 12 to 14. So be sure that you provide your grain mix that's going to be 14 to 16% if you're using fescue hay as your forage source. And then lastly, be careful. Too many folks lose cattle when they're in a corn-based program by not adding adequate limestone or calcium carbonate. And those cattle will get up to around 1,000, 1,100 pounds and then begin developing water belly and die. And it's a very simple fix of making sure we got the correct calcium to phosphorus ratio. And then also make sure that we have our trace minerals in there and our vitamins are in there that were needed. Don't cut out the vitamins. Now, real quickly, sorry, I got somebody walking down the road. Let's just jump to the pictures. I just want you to see, this is an example of a large frame feeder calf, 830 pounds. This just kind of gives you an idea. Now here he is 300 pounds later at harvest. Notice how he doesn't look very finished compared to the first one. And here he is, just a quick video. You can just kind of look at him. And as that first one that we looked at, this steer's a larger frame calf, and he's just not quite as finished. And we'll show you the carcass here real quick. So this guy had almost no subcutaneous fat, 3/10 of an inch, and hung a big carcass at 720 pounds, but almost no fat trim up there. Here's a heifer, and if you look at this heifer, similar weight to that steer when they started. Can you go to the next one? And the next one? It's about the same harvest weight, 1,130 pounds, but a much smaller framed animal that is going to be more closely to that slaughter endpoint as far as fat goes. And then here's its carcass. This is the other extreme, right? A relatively small ribeye area and an animal that's got 7/10 of an inch of back fat, which would have been excessively conditioned. So these things are not easy to see, and you have to learn. And with the Department of Ag, you can use their grading program. Donovan Pigg was doing that for a while. I think he still may be, but I'd encourage you to take advantage of that service. And you want to certainly avoid that overfeeding. It's a waste of feed and it's expensive, and that last 100 pounds are the most expensive that you'll put on the animal because they're the least efficient. So in summary, we can finish cattle in any variety of programs, from grass-fed to hybrid systems, but it's important to develop your program to supply the type of nutrients to develop the cattle and finish them to the end product that you want. And I'd encourage you to spot check your performance. And then lastly, Dr. Van Valen, who's our specialist at Princeton, is working on developing a finishing program coming out next year or maybe late this year. And so we'll have some additional resources from her program. Thank you all. And again, I apologize for hopping on here late this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Lehmkuhler. It's some great information. And again, if any participants have questions, please follow up with us after the webinar. We are going to move into Warren Beeler's slides. Warren, are you available and ready?
Unmute there. Hey, yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. Very, very pleased. You did a great job tonight. This has been excellent with Melissa and Nathan, two of the wonderful families we've got here. Very, very good spokesman for beef cattle. And Lehmkuhler took all my time, so I'll go fast and get this thing figured out. We're very blessed in Kentucky to have this tobacco settlement money. You know, it started when they figured out cigarettes would kill you. Everybody was suing the cigarette companies one at a time, and they couldn't stand that. So they said, if you'll quit suing us, we'll pay. 46 states took them up on it. Kentucky's the only state that took the money, put half of it in healthcare and half of it in ag. This is the projected budget for next year. You can see $106 million coming in. Basic, when you get all done, you take out for the food banks, which is a market for produce. Great, feeding hungry people. That's wonderful. Conservation money, your conservation cost your money, comes out of tobacco money. That leaves us with about $34.5 million. 35% goes to the counties based on how much tobacco base you had basically in 1997. 65% goes to the state for statewide or regional projects. Okay, Olivia. Here's a bunch of the programs. I mean, most of you may have heard of CAPE. If you haven't, you need to go to your county extension agent. That's a cost share program, and you have to score high enough to get the money. And some counties have more money than others because it's based on how much burley you had in 97. But there's all kinds of things to cost share there for beef cattle producers, from stuff like technology to fencing to forages to you name it. It's in there, and if it's not in there, I need to know so I can put it in there. Of course, we got Youth CAPE to help our youngsters and next generation in counties that want to do that, put the Young Farmers Fund line. We have energy programs. We have on-farm water program, water harvesting type programs like that. And we're going to spend a little time because of all the discussion and COVID, what COVID's done to us on this meat processing thing. It's kind of exposed our weaknesses to a certain degree. And so we're going to do something about that meat processing thing. It was a problem before. We've now invested, since the money showed up, $626 million, and agriculture at Farmgate has grown by $2 billion as a result of that money. Not all of it is tobacco, but we basically have helped. It's just been amazing. When you get over here, here's some of the big projects. The UK Grain and Forage Center of Excellence is going to be something we've invested for the next 50 years. Kentucky Proud. If you're not using Kentucky Proud, they have promotional money, help you buy brochures or build a website or do anything. You need to advertise your beef. Kentucky Proud, you need to contact them at the Department of Ag. Beef Network, Lehmkuhler and Les Anderson and Dare Bullock and Kevin Laurent and all those guys do a terrific job. We're really blessed with specialists, and they do a K-card. I don't think there's any money we spend that's more important than getting a business plan on somebody that's a new entrepreneur like that. And then we can see on down the line, even to the farm. We've invested in 50 farmers market structures. Okay, Olivia. Here's the meat processing deal. When COVID hit us, we figured out where we were weak, and that is those big processing plants weren't built to stand 6 foot apart and cut up meat. And so as people got sick, then people got afraid. Then some people just basically rather draw a check than work. We couldn't get them processed. When we couldn't get them processed, everything backed up, price went down, and then everybody headed to our local processors. We were 2 months backed up before COVID. Now we're a year backed up for most of them. So the Ag Development Board came to us at Governor's Office of Ag Policy and said, we got to do something about this meat processing. We knew that already. So we've developed basically it's going to be a 4-level system. We got 3 of them already in place. We did it in 3 weeks and got it passed. Level 1 is for only USDA plants. We establish a baseline on how many animals they've done USDA. Any animals they do, Kentucky animals, they do above that baseline, they get $100 for cattle, $50 for hogs, $25 for sheep or goat, $1 for chickens, with a cap of $20,000 in a year. Incentive to process more Kentucky animals. We don't know how well that's going to work, because if you're doing 120% of what you can do, maybe it won't, but we've got a couple signed up already. Level 2 is for custom or USDA. We will do 75% of the project, with our part being as high as $37,500. That's a $50,000 project. Now you have to prove that you're going to, how many more animals you're going to process Kentucky animals through that particular facility. That's level 2. Level 3 is the big one. We will do 75% of and we call it a forgivable loan. A forgivable loan is just a grant with strings attached. We can take a loan, we can take a mortgage with that. We'll do a $250,000, our part, 75%. That's a $333,000 project. Again, you've got to document how you're going to increase, how many number of animals you're going to increase. And this one requires that we get a business plan from K-Card, and that basically Dr. Renfro and the meat specialists that we have go in and put their blessing on it. That part of it is, we don't want to build something that basically is just going to be something that it's not right. So we're asking on the larger investment, level 3, that we do that. All right. Level 4 is still in discussion, not approved, but it's for new facilities. We've had over 20 inquiries, and we haven't had it for a little over a month and a half. And probably 6 to 8 of them have been new people wanting to build new facilities. That's the greatest way to increase processing. It'll probably look something like this. We won't do any more than 50% of the project. That's pretty typical for ag development funds. We can say county funds matched by state funds as a grant or a forgivable loan, and then do the rest of it with a loan out of the ag finance program, up to half. That will require this advisory team. That's K-Card and the meat specialists go in and look. We need a business plan. We need advice. Really a reality check. I had a call today from a county that I'm sure once we talk to them, they will figure out it won't work. We're going to look at a possible cap of 500,000 unless we find a big one. If we find a big one, and we're talking to one that could be a big one, that cap won't matter. And we are going to look at geographical need. We don't want to build these processing plants that put anybody out of business. You're not going to do that right now with the demand that's out there, but COVID's not going to last forever. Here's where they're located now. Most of the USDA processing plants. The red ones are plants that have asked us for help. We're getting ready to approve 4 Friday, Marksbury, Hamptons, Garrisons in Lewis County, and Wises in Taylor County. The yellow ones are 6 that we were going to committee with. So we've already had 10 inquiries, and you can see how they're scattered out, but you can also see where we need more processing. Go ahead. The legacy of the Ag Development Fund is Ag Finance Corporation. It's a loan program. We've got basically 729 loans, $94 million in the loan program. 87 million loaned out, 68% to beginning farmers. We do participating. We don't deal with you, the farmer. We deal with your lender. They come to us. We do 2 3/4% money. 3/4% goes to the lender to do the work. 2% comes back to us. We're now getting back on our 2% in principal off that $87 million, between $800,000 and $1 million a month. We got money in Frankfurt that's making money and helping people. We typically do 12, 15 loans a month for $2 or $2.5 million. We've only had 7 bad loans, and half of them have been ag development loans pushed over. We don't charge anything in terms of administrative costs against ag finance. And again, we got money in Frankfurt making money and helping people. Go ahead, Olivia. If you don't know about us, or if you know about it, if you got suggestions, or you got some way, this month we've been very fortunate that we've been able to keep this money all this time. There's my cell number. There's our office number. There's a website is actually agpolicy.ky.gov, I think. So you can do that, but it's you call me and I'll call you back. We need to get people beyond the trailer gate with ownership, like what Nathan said. That's the key to the whole thing. I'll hush. Now Lehmkuhler took all my daggone time. I'll hush and then you.
Sorry, Warren.
Hey, how you are?
Send me a bill.
Yeah, it's in the mail.
Well, thanks a lot, Warren. Appreciate that. And thanks to all the presenters tonight for spending their time with us this evening. What's up on the screen now is our last slide. It's got our general K card, phone number, and email, along with our contact information for Olivia and myself. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or want to discuss anything further about your farm business. That's what we're here for at K Card, and we're glad to do it. One thing I do want to make sure I mention here before we get to the final closeout of the night, but while some of the other folks have been talking, we've had some of the presenters that have been answering some of the questions in the Q&A section here. So make sure and take a look at those to see if your question's been answered. I apologize we weren't able to get to all of them in the interest of time, but there's several answers that have been given there. So a few things before we do close out for tonight. By the end of this week, I want to let everybody know the recordings of tonight's webinar and also for the next 2 nights that we're going to do subsequently will be available on the K-Card YouTube channel. This is new to us, so we're trying it out, but we'll have those up and an email will be sent out to all attendees. This will contain a link to the recorded webinars. We'll have resources discussing topics addressed by our presenters and a survey. The survey will ask you for your input on the webinar itself. And also if you're interested in any follow-up by K-Card and or the Kentucky Beef Council staff members. If you are a staff member from K-Card or Kentucky Beef Council, we'll be in touch with you soon. So with that, I just want to say thank you to our presenters tonight. Thank you for all of you who joined in to watch. Join us again tomorrow night at 7 p.m. for part 2 of our webinar series, a discussion about processing, planning, and marketing local beef. So with that, good night, everyone. Take care.